This is The Property Show and I'm Lim Soon Heng. Today we have Shaun Di Gregorio, the CEO of a company that operates iProperty.com, a portal that lists condos, bungalows, terrace houses and shop lots for sale or rent. Shaun is an Australian working here and has knowledge of the real estate market in Australia and Malaysia. Now, having come from Australia and having lived there and worked in the industry, tell us a bit about the differences that you have observed between Malaysia and Australia.
Well, I guess one of the main differences is that the real estate industry here in Malaysia is quite a significant part of the economy. I think in an emerging nation like Malaysia, the activity of property developers is quite significant compared to Australia, where you've probably got a more mature market and more turnover of existing properties. I would say that the regulatory environment in Australia is a little more constricting around what developers can do and the pace at which development can happen. In Malaysia, I think you've got an advantage where things seem to happen a bit quicker, and I'm not sure whether that's due to the regulatory environment or more entrepreneurial property developers, but there's a couple of key differences.
You seem to suggest that's better.
Well, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think if you asked developers in somewhere like Australia, that they would argue that it's too regulated and makes it too difficult to get stuff done. The flip side to that is that, consumer protection is probably more developed, so consumers probably feel safer about investing a large amount of money in development, whereas in Malaysia I think that, I see far more development happen more rapidly. Whether that's a good thing at the end of the day for consumers is probably the open-ended problem.
Is affordable housing an issue in Australia like it is right now being faced by Malaysia?
Yeah, look, I think it's an issue everywhere and certainly an issue in Australia. Anywhere that gets a lot of population growth, and Malaysia's a growing country, and particularly around the Klang Valley, the population growth will put pressure on housing supply. In Australia, definite problems with affordability. In fact, I think affordability is probably at its worst from a buyer perspective that it's been in, a generation.
You see prices here so expensive that we couldn't afford to buy it. For the first timers, it's like $500,000 above like that.
That's probably the case in a lot of places in Asia. Singapore same, Hong Kong same, and certainly Malaysia I think fits into that category as well.
And in Australia, it is not so serious an issue?
I would say it's a serious issue. It's certainly an issue that plagues government. It's an issue that's in the media, and it's an issue because the great Australian dream is to own your own home. And that's drilled into people at a very young age. And there's this expectation that when I get a job and get married, I'll be able to afford a house in a place that's not, an hour and a half from where I work or, out in the country somewhere if I work in the city. So a huge political issue and certainly a lifestyle issue, which is what a lot of people live in Australia for.
Do Malaysian home buyers kind of look for things that Australian home buyers don't?
Look, I think the only thing that's probably happened in Australia in recent years is there's a real emphasis on sustainability and the environmental impact of development and carbon footprint, and a lot more regulations now around new houses having to have recycled water or solar heating or environmentally sustainable ways of providing energy to that house. But culturally, I think, people still like their own slice of land. They still want a landed property. An apartment is often seen as a stepping stone to a landed property, and I think that's the same. But there is certainly that same passion for real estate in both countries.
So from your perspective, Malaysians are also looking for landed property just like Australians are?
Yeah, look, I think so. I think if you look at the investments that perform best in property, they tend to be bungalows or landed properties, and that's purely based on demand. I think people like to have a bit of space and like their own little patch. Having said that, the reality is not just for Malaysians but for Australians and many people that probably going to live in an apartment or a condo for longer than you might desire, just because it's a case of affordability and availability.
Based on my visits to Australia, I noticed that condos are not quite the thing over there as they are over here. Like everywhere you go, you just see high rises.
Yeah, and it's a cultural thing as well. Part of the Australian psyche is your own quarter acre or your own piece of land, and that's been a multi-generational thing, and it's only in recent years that governments have said, well, you know what, the cost of providing infrastructure, the cost of building roads out to far-flung developments is just not economic. So they're now very much forcing people toward medium density and increasingly high density. But certainly KL and Malaysia are far more down the track of high density living and apartment blocks, particularly you see them dotted throughout KL, not just in certain parts. So that's a fundamental difference. But I think the idea of a landed property for everyone is still a nice sort of dream to have.
So there is a correlation between high density and requiring infrastructure that is at least more cost effective.
Oh, without question. Governments and policy designers will always push people to live where there's existing infrastructure. And I think KL do it quite well, where be it around transport hubs or shopping centres, they've developed the ability to build residential. In Australia, that is still something that people are coming to terms with. And, it's almost as though, having faced outwards for so long, the public are now being told to face back towards cities and live on top of train stations or live where there are services existing, because the cost of providing those things is just so expensive these days.
What do you think our property industry here can learn from the property industry in Australia?
Look, I don't think there's any silver bullets in wisdom that they're going to pick up from the industry in Australia, but I think the industry in Australia is more regulated, and I think at the end of the day that does give consumers more protection, and I think the transparency of information available to consumers is important. So, the flip side to that is maybe things don't get done as quick, but at the end of the day there's probably a little more protection for consumers because the industry is more regulated.
Coming to Malaysia, the portal that you have has been live for how long now?
Look, it's been around for about 8 years. It was started in a classical entrepreneurial way, in literally sort of the lounge room or the garage, and was then acquired by a larger company which has since built the network across Asia of similar styles of websites.
What have you seen in that time in terms of property prices, in terms of the types of buildings that have gone up? What have you seen about the landscape?
Well, I think the internet, be it in property or anywhere else, has empowered consumers. They can now access more information and hold, be it developers or government, more accountable for what they do. So I think it's driven a more professional approach to the way property's bought and sold and transacted, and the amount of information that consumers have available to them, to force agents to be more professional and to, get developers to build properties that are probably more in line with what consumers are demanding, only because there's now a forum or an ability for, be it developers or agents, and consumers to engage one another. And it's remarkable the amount of information that is made available through the internet these days, and people are empowered.
I've been talking to Shaun Di Gregorio, the CEO of iProperty Malaysia. When we come back, we'll ask him what Malaysians are looking for. Properties to buy or rent? Condos or landed properties? We'll also explore with him issues faced by home buyers. This is Lim Soon Heng on BFM 89.9, the business station, and you've been listening to The Property Show, brought to you by Nippon Paint. Welcome back to The Property Show, brought to you by Nippon Paint. I am Lim Soon Heng. I've been talking to Shaun Di Gregorio, the CEO of iProperty.com Malaysia. In the first part of the interview, we talked about the pressing issues of home ownership here, which are shared by home buyers in Australia, Shaun's home. And now we look at some concerns of home buyers here in Malaysia and what can be done. How much has property price gone up in the 8 years?
I would say it's more than doubled. I mean, since 2000 to 2010, the global property market has, doubled, tripled in some places and come off as quickly in others. But in Asia, it's been a remarkable story. And in Malaysia, it's very consistent. So you've seen a rapid appreciation in prices in Malaysia over the last 7 or 8 years.
Based on the traffic that you're getting, what are Malaysians predominantly looking at?
They kind of do three things. It's about a quarter of the visits to our site are looking at rental properties, and typically they tend to be apartments or condos. Probably 2/3 of people who are looking to buy. You then divide those into those that are looking to buy to invest and those that are looking to buy to live. To invest, a lot of people look at condos because they can get a good return, and often with new developments there's a fixed rental return guaranteed. But bungalows or landed properties are still the favourite thing. And then there is a portion of people looking at our website that are just browsing, and often those people who are browsing are those that are thinking about buying or thinking about selling but are not active. So we capture a really broad set of activities that people do on the website.
What price ranges do they cover?
There's a good selection of properties for under 200, but then you go right up to, properties in, Damansara Heights and around these areas that are in the, 10 to 15 million. So there's something for everyone, and if you're a first home buyer, there's stuff available. If you want to have a sneak peek into how the rich and famous live, you can do that too.
Typically, what are home buyers' complaints?
Or price. If there was one thing that buyers want more certainty over, it's price, and that's very difficult for a government to achieve. I think the most compelling thing for home buyers to do is make sure that they get professional advice. I think often we can be a bit spontaneous when it comes to property. You know, I'll see something I like and before I know it, I've signed up for a loan and I own it. And I think taking the time to make that decision carefully, get professional advice, understand finance, understand what it's going to cost you, because this is probably the biggest financial decision you will ever make.
Typically, I mean, there is a kind of a ratio to measure how much, based on how much you're earning, what kind of homes you should be looking at.
A rule of thumb, this will be different from place to place, is you want to have no more than a third of your income committed to your mortgage. If you've got a two-income household, that makes that equation meaningful. But, you know, many first-home buyers will stretch themselves to half their income on their mortgage. And you just have to be very, very careful. My advice to home buyers is remember that your first house is not your last house, and to start small and build rather than overstretch.
I'm picking up from what you just said that the government has very little room to play in managing the cost of homes. If the homes on the average are $500,000, then there is a disconnect there, no?
There is, and you'd argue that properties are, vis-a-vis income, are overvalued. Malaysia doesn't have a mortgage on that situation. It's the case in other countries. And generally, supply and demand fixes that, and you would expect that, you know, property prices would slow down. It is a real conundrum for government because in many respects there's only so much they can do to make that equation a more equitable one. But I don't think that that's going to materially change in the foreseeable future. It's a problem that countries that are growing as fast as Malaysia have to figure a way through.
So what the government can do is kind of limited, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's initiatives they can take, and which they have done with the first home buying scheme. I think that there's speculation about a build and sell laws around developers. I think that there are certain things they can do. They can open up more land. I understand that the population of the Klang Valley grew by 7 or 8% last year, and that's a massive impost on town planning. It's a huge issue for government to manage, and it's very difficult to build that many houses in that time frame, and the only thing that can happen is cost goes up and people's expectations have to come down.
What other issues are confronted by buyers?
Well, I think understanding the process that you need to go through. I think that if it's your first time, it can be quite a daunting and unfamiliar process. So the terminologies that you are confronted with, the contracts that you have to sign, and you're making, in a lot of cases, a long-term financial commitment. You know, if you're a young person, the idea of a 15, 20-year commitment is, well, it's probably, you know, half your life.
I always thought that's 30 years.
Well, 30 years, you know, I mean, that's an inconceivable amount of time to commit to anything. So I think understanding what you're signing up for, understanding the terminologies, understanding the consequences if you can't commit to the loan and can't repay it, and making sure you get professional help. I just can't stress enough the need for particularly first home buyers to get professional advice, because this is a massive commitment that you're making.
When you talk about professional advice, who are you referring to?
Well, I think you can get a professional agent, and making sure that there's someone you know that's been referred to you, that's been in the industry, that maybe your friends have trusted or your family have used. I think there's no harm in getting legal advice. If there's a contract that you're asked to sign, if you're not comfortable with it, get some advice so you know what you're signing. And I just can't stress enough, the cost of doing that might seem a lot at the time, but if it's a 30-year loan you're signing up for, and, you know, this is going to see you into your middle age, then you should definitely get some advice and help. And even getting a loan, you know, which one do you go for? What's value? What are the hidden fees? What am I signing up for? How much should I pay? It's a minefield. So I just encourage people to take their time.